The wrench cost $62 at the hardware store on 5th. It hit the bottom of my koi pond and sank past 4 inches of water lily pads before it settled into the mud. My grandson stood over that pond for a full 10 seconds, like staring at it might make it float back up. My daughter wasn't screaming yet. That came later, once she understood what I'd actually done, and why. 20 minutes before that wrench went into the water, a man I'd trusted for 11 years stood in my own garage and told me, calm as reading a grocery list, that I'd become inconvenient. Neighbor here, no one at that cookout expected an old man's toolbox to end a marriage, but grief teaches you patience, and patience, once it runs out, doesn't announce itself. It just leaves quietly, the way mine did, holding a wrench. My name is Frank Delaney. I'm 66 years old, and for 31 years, I ran a small engine repair shop off Route 9 outside Erie, Pennsylvania. Lawnmowers, snowblowers, generators, the machines nobody thinks about until they break at the worst possible moment. My hands still know the weight of a torque wrench better than they know most people's names these days. I sold the shop 4 years ago to a kid named Petey, who used to sweep my floors for gas money, and I don't regret it, not even on the mornings my knees remind me I spent 3 decades kneeling on concrete. My wife Donna and I built our house in 1988, out past the tree line, where the lots were cheap and the taxes were worse. She wanted a garden, and I gave her 4 raised beds, and a koi pond I dug myself over one brutal August, cursing the clay soil the whole time. She stocked it with 6 fish from a hatchery in Meadville, and named every one of them after a golden girl, which I thought was ridiculous until I caught myself doing the same thing after she was gone, calling out to Blanche when she'd surface for pellets. Donna died 3 winters ago. Pancreatic cancer, 8 weeks from the diagnosis to the funeral home. I won't dress that up for you. Some griefs you can find language for eventually. That one still doesn't have words that fit right in my mouth. What I have instead is the garden she planted, the koi pond she stocked, and Saturday mornings, when my daughter Melissa still comes by, sometimes with my grandson Theo, and we sit on the same cracked patio furniture Donna picked out at a yard sale in 2003 and refused to replace because, she said, comfortable is comfortable, Frank. Stop trying to fix what isn't broken. If you've ever kept your mouth shut at your own table because the alternative felt like losing the only family you had left, then you already know where this is going. Before I tell you what happened with that wrench, do me a kindness and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I like knowing how far these Saturday mornings travel. Melissa is 35, works as a hospital pharmacist 2 towns over, and married a man named Curtis Voss 9 years ago. Curtis sells commercial HVAC systems, wears a watch that costs more than my truck, and has never once, in 9 years, called me anything but Frank. Not Dad. Not even Mr. Delaney. Just Frank, said with the particular flatness of a man reading a name off a form. I never held that against him, not really. Some men aren't built for warmth. What I held against him, slowly, over years, was smaller and sharper than that. The kind of thing that doesn't leave a mark you can point to. Curtis liked to comment on my hands. Still got that grease under the nails, Frank? Some things don't wash out, huh? He liked to comment on my truck, a 2009 Silverado with 300,000 miles on it, that runs better than half the new trucks I see on the road. That thing still starting, living dangerously. He liked most of all to comment on my house, always in that same offhand way, like he was noting the weather. Big place for one guy. Bet the taxes eat you alive out here. Everyone would laugh, mild little laughs, the kind that ask you to laugh along so nobody has to feel the weight of what was actually said. Melissa would give my arm a squeeze afterward. He doesn't mean anything by it, Dad. That's just Curtis. Maybe that was true the first year. By year 9, I'd stopped believing it, though I hadn't found the nerve yet to say so out loud, not even to myself in the bathroom mirror at 6 in the morning, which is where a man does most of his honest thinking. I kept my mouth shut for 2 reasons, same as most men my age probably do. Because I loved my daughter more than I loved being right about anything. And because Donna, in the last month, when she was mostly sleeping and only sometimes lucid, gripped my hand hard enough to bruise and made me promise I'd keep this family together after she was gone, whatever that cost me. I took that promise seriously. Maybe too seriously. Maybe some promises made to a dying woman need a little translation once she's not there to clarify what she meant. The Saturday I'm telling you about started like every other one that summer. Warm, a little humid, cicadas going in the tree line behind the property. I'd smoked a pork shoulder overnight, the way Donna taught me, low and slow with her rub, which is nothing but paprika, brown sugar, garlic powder, and a spoonful of instant coffee that she swore by and I never once questioned, because everything that woman touched turned out better than I expected. Melissa arrived first with Theo, who's 8 now and obsessed with the koi, always crouched at the pond's edge trying to get Rose, the biggest one, to eat straight out of his palm. Curtis showed up 40 minutes late, no food, no drink, just his phone and the particular energy of a man who'd already decided the day was beneath him. He looked at the pork shoulder resting on the cutting board and said, "Still doing the whole backyard pitmaster thing, huh, Frank? There's places that'll smoke a better shoulder than you in half the time." I told him some things are worth doing slow, and he laughed like I'd agreed with him about something. I let it go. I always let it go. We sat down to eat around 2, at the same wrought iron table Donna bought secondhand, and I'd repainted every couple years to keep the rust off. Theo was telling me about a science project on volcanoes, all elbows and enthusiasm, and I was half listening and half watching my daughter's face soften the way it used to before her whole posture became about managing the room. Then Curtis looked over at my plate, piled with pork and Melissa's coleslaw, and said, "That's a lot of food for a man your age, Frank. Your cardiologist know about this?" I told him my cardiologist and I were on good terms. Thank you, and reached for the barbecue sauce. That's when Curtis's forearm came across the table, quick, almost lazy, like he was reaching for the salt, and swept my plate straight off the edge. It hit the patio stone and split in 2. Pork and slaw scattered across concrete Donna and I had poured together the summer after we married. My fork bounced once and settled in the grass. Nobody spoke. Theo froze mid-sentence about volcanoes. Curtis looked down at the wreckage of my dinner for exactly 1 second, then shrugged, and said the line he'd clearly had loaded for a while now. "Whoops. Guess the cardiologist thanks me. Eat something green next time, big guy. I want to be honest with you the way I'd want a friend to be honest with me." My first instinct, the very first one, before anger, before humiliation, was to apologize. To say something like, "No harm done, I'll grab another plate, let's not make this a thing." That's what 30 years of keeping a promise to a dying woman does to a man. It rewires the alarm system until the alarm starts apologizing for going off. If that sounds familiar to you, if you've ever smoothed over someone else's cruelty just so the room could keep breathing, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and I'm sorry you know it. I didn't say any of that, though. I just sat there a second, feeling my knee complain as I shifted my weight, the same knee that gave out on me in 2019 and never fully came back. And that's when I noticed Curtis's tool bag sitting by the pond's edge, where he'd set it down that morning, claiming he was finally going to fix my leaning tomato trellis, a job he'd promised for 2 months and never once picked up a tool for. Sitting right on top, gleaming, brand new, still with the manufacturer's sticker on the handle, was a torque wrench, a good one. Snap-on, maybe $200, the kind of wrench a man buys to look like he does his own work rather than because he actually does. I stood up. My knee filed its complaint. I walked to the tool bag, picked up that wrench, and Curtis frowned at me, more confused than concerned. "What are you doing, Frank?" I didn't answer, because there was nothing left in me worth saying to him in that particular moment. I carried it the 11 steps to the koi pond, the pond Donna and I dug with our own hands in a Pennsylvania August that nearly killed us both, and I opened my hand over the water. It went down clean, past the lily pads, past Blanche and Rose and Dorothy circling in confusion at the disturbance, and settled into 6 inches of mud at the bottom. I turned around and gave Curtis back his own sentence, near enough word for word. "Whoops, guess it's just a wrench." The yard came apart in about 3 seconds. Curtis went straight to the pond's edge, on his knees in the mulch, sleeves shoved up to the elbow, reaching into water he clearly hadn't expected to actually touch. His mother, who I hadn't even mentioned was there, gasped from her lawn chair. And Melissa, my Melissa, turned to me with her eyes lit up like I'd set the house on fire and said, "Dad, what is wrong with you?" That was the wound of the whole afternoon, and it had nothing to do with a wrench. My dinner was in the grass. 9 years of small, deliberate little cuts were sitting right there in the open for the first time. And not once, not one single time, did my daughter ask if I was all right. The only casualty she could see was $200 of stainless steel at the bottom of a pond I'd built for her mother. I got my truck keys off the hook by the kitchen door. Nobody tried to stop me. Backing the Silverado down the driveway, I caught one last look in the mirror. Curtis still on his knees at the water, Melissa standing over the broken plate like it might explain itself. Theo watching all of it with the particular stillness kids get when they understand more than the adults think they do. I should have felt bad. Mostly I felt tired, though not the kind of tired sleep fixes. 15 minutes later, on Route 19, heading nowhere in particular, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. Melissa, voice shaking. Dad, you have no idea what you just did to this family. I listened to it twice, parked in the lot of a hardware store I didn't need anything from. She was right, I didn't have any idea yet. I was about to get one. For 2 days, my phone stayed mostly quiet, except for 3 text messages, and I want to tell you about those 3 messages, because they're the whole story, really. Everything that came before condensed down into something you could read off a screen in 10 seconds. Saturday night. You need to replace that wrench, Dad. It wasn't cheap. Sunday morning. This is embarrassing. Curtis's mother saw the whole thing. Sunday evening. Curtis says if you apologize and cover the cost, we can put this behind us. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee going cold in front of me and read those 3 messages more times than I'd like to admit, doing the arithmetic on everything they didn't say. Not once, "Are you okay, Dad?" Not once, "What happened before that?" The house was quiet in the particular way a house gets quiet when you've filled it with someone for 30-some years and then you haven't. Donna's reading chair still sat empty in the corner by the window, the cushion still holding its shape from a woman who's been gone 3 years now. I did what men like me do when a feeling gets too big to hold with bare hands. I found something to fix. The hinge on the garden shed had been sticking since spring, and I spent 40 minutes on it, dropped a screw twice, muttered words Donna would have fined me $1 for, and the whole time the same 3 seconds played behind my eyes on a loop. The plate cracking, Curtis shrugging, my daughter's face when she looked at me like I was the problem. Around 4 that afternoon, my neighbor Walt Ferraro leaned over the fence line, the way he does most Saturdays, usually with some complaint about his knees or his corgi or both. He didn't lean on the fence casual that day, though. He just stood there with his hands in his pockets, which worried me, because Walt Ferraro is a man who can talk to a fence post for 20 minutes straight, and now he looked like he'd rather be somewhere else entirely. "Been chewing on yesterday," he said. "Haven't we all?" I told him. He didn't smile. "Frank, that wasn't an accident. I stopped what I was doing." "I know," I said. "No," he said. "I mean, I watched it." He looked right at your plate before he did it. Something cold moved through my chest, the way it does when a thing you already suspected gets said out loud by somebody else, and suddenly it's real in a way your own thoughts never quite managed. And then Walt told me the rest, and this is the part that changed everything. Back in April, he said, he'd been out walking his dog past my property line and heard Curtis on the phone in his car, parked right there on the street, laughing with someone about something. He only caught one piece of it clearly. Told me exactly what Curtis said, word for word. Something about how once the old man's knees finally give out for good, this whole lot would make one hell of a lake house, and how property out here was only getting more valuable the longer I held on to it. My house. The house Donna and I built with our own hands and a mortgage that scared us both. The house where Melissa learned to ride a bike in that same driveway. The house where I'd sat in a hospice bed for 6 weeks, holding my wife's hand while she went. Already itemized. Already spoken about like a future line item in somebody else's investment portfolio, and he'd just been waiting on the vacancy. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat at the dining table with an old photo album, the kind with the sticky plastic pages, and took the whole tour. Melissa at 5, gap-toothed, holding up a crayon drawing of our family. Melissa at 17, unimpressed at her own graduation. Melissa at 26, laughing beside her mother in this same backyard at something I've long since forgotten. Then the newer pages. Melissa and Curtis at Christmas. Melissa and Curtis at Theo's birthday. His arm always around her waist, his smile always camera ready, and me somewhere at the edge of the frame, usually the one holding the camera, sometimes cropped half out of the picture entirely. I ran my thumb over an old photo of Donna and asked the empty room if I'd missed it. Whether I'd gotten so scared of losing my daughter that I'd made myself smaller and smaller to fit into whatever corner of the family Curtis left open for me. I don't know who I was asking. Her, maybe. Myself. God. If he was listening that particular Tuesday. I thought about calling Melissa right then. My thumb hovered over her name in my phone for a long minute. Then I heard her voicemail again in my head. "You have no idea what you just did to this family." And I put the phone down and made a decision that had nothing to do with keeping anybody else comfortable for maybe the first time in 30 years. I was going to pay attention. Quietly. Carefully. The way you listen to an engine that's about to tell you something is seriously wrong, long before it actually quits on you. Because if Curtis thought getting older made a man harmless, he'd mistaken my silence for weakness. And nobody spends 31 years fixing small engines without learning that quiet doesn't mean broken. Sometimes quiet means a man is finally paying attention. After Walt's visit, I stopped seeing Curtis as merely rude and started seeing him as a man with a plan and a timeline. Every backhanded compliment, every offer to help, started sounding to me like a line item on a spreadsheet I couldn't see. I told nobody. I confronted nobody. From the outside, nothing about my life changed. Inside, I was running full diagnostics for the first time in years. The pattern showed itself fast, once I was actually looking for it. Melissa started stopping by more, which at first felt like a gift, until I noticed the shape of it. She'd bring coffee, ask about Theo's science project, ask about my garden, and then, almost offhand, "This house is a lot of upkeep for one person, Dad. Have you thought about something smaller?" I told her it kept me busy. She mentioned my knees, the basement stairs, the property taxes climbing every year. Then, stirring her coffee without quite looking at me, she asked whether I still had the original deed paperwork somewhere organized, or whether that was still buried in a drawer somewhere. There it was, not loud, not dramatic, just placed there, easy as a weather report. "It's around," I told her, and gave her nothing further, and watched something flicker across my daughter's face that I would have missed a month earlier. Donna always said Melissa couldn't lie to save her life. Turned out she wasn't much better at carrying somebody else's assignment either. The following week, Curtis showed up on a Tuesday, unannounced, with a bottle of wine that cost more than I'd have spent in a month. The first gift he'd given me in 9 years that wasn't a backhanded observation. He admired the pork rub recipe, asked about the truck with what almost sounded like real interest, and offered to have his landscaping guy come take a look at my property. No charge, just professional curiosity. I told him I was fine handling my own yard. I caught the quick look he traded with Melissa afterward, the specific look married people give each other when a rehearsed conversation goes sideways. That look bothered me worse than any insult, because insults are just weather. That kind of look is climate. A week after that, my regular Thursday appointment came up with my attorney, a man named Ray Castellano who'd handled Donna's estate and mine for going on 20 years now, who I'd known since before either of us had gray in our hair. I'd gone in for something routine, updating a beneficiary designation on an old policy. Ray finished the paperwork, slid it across the desk, then sat back and told me he'd been debating whether to bring something up. "Your son-in-law called this office," he said, "back in the spring." I asked what about. He said Curtis hadn't asked about my file specifically. He'd asked general questions. "The kind people ask," Ray said carefully, "when they're curious how guardianship works for an aging parent. Whether a person judged, unable to manage their own finances, loses control of real property automatically, or whether that requires a court process. Whether moving into assisted living changes who holds title to a house." I sat very still in that leather chair. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "The only thing I legally could," Ray said, with the faint ghost of a smile that wasn't really a smile at all. "Nothing. He never said your name outright. He didn't have to," I told him. We sat in that silence together a moment, two old men who'd read the same page at the same time and didn't love what it said. I drove home slow that evening, not because of traffic, but because every mile dissolved one more excuse I'd been carrying for years. Maybe he didn't mean it that way. Maybe it's just how he jokes. Maybe Melissa doesn't see it. Maybe I'm too sensitive about all this. One by one, every excuse fell away, and by the time I pulled into my own driveway, there weren't any left standing. That night, I stood in my garage a long while, tools hanging exactly where my hands expect to find them, 30 years of order built into a room most people would call clutter. I picked up a framed photo from our 25th anniversary, Donna laughing because I'd burned the first batch of ribs that day. I ran my thumb over the glass and said out loud, "They think getting older means getting easy to move." The garage didn't answer, obviously, but somehow, in the particular way grief sometimes works, I felt like she did. I called Ray before 8 the next morning. "I want to make some changes," I told him. "What kind?" he asked. "The kind," I said, "that makes sure nobody ever mistakes my silence for a signature again." Here's the part that surprised me most. None of it, in Ray's hands, was ever about revenge. He asked me one question that reframed the whole thing for me. "What outcome lets you actually sleep at night, Frank?" I thought about that honestly, and told him I didn't want to punish anybody. I just never again wanted somebody planning my future without asking the man actually living it. So that's what we built, across 3 meetings and a session with an estate planner. A revocable trust. An independent trustee, no family, no friends, nobody with anything to gain. Updated medical directives. Powers of attorney rewritten clean. Every document saying the same quiet sentence in careful legal language. Nobody steps in over Frank Delaney because they've decided they know better. A month drifted by like that. Melissa called twice. I let both ring through, not out of spite, just because I didn't have the words ready yet. I mowed my own lawn instead and let the koi pond settle back to normal, though Rose stayed skittish for a while after losing a wrench to her own front yard. Then one Saturday, Curtis called what he described as a family meeting to clear the air, he said, before things got out of hand. I told Melissa I'd come. I wasn't dreading it the way I expected to. I wasn't driving over there to defend myself or win an argument. That season, whatever you want to call it, was over. Ray met me in the driveway with his slim leather folder, asked if I was ready. I told him I was done pretending, which felt like the more honest answer. Everyone was already gathered when we walked in. Melissa, Curtis, his mother, his brother, even Walt, who I learned Curtis had invited because he'd apparently heard Walt witness the whole wrench incident and wanted him, in Curtis's words, on the same page as everybody else. The room went quiet the moment Ray and I stepped through the door. Curtis clocked the folder in Ray's hand immediately and let out a short laugh. You brought a lawyer, Frank? Seriously? I told him I'd brought a man who's very good with paperwork. Curtis planted himself by the fireplace, hands in his pockets, hosting his own intervention like it was a business meeting. We've all been uncomfortable since the pond thing, he said, scanning the room. I think Frank owes everybody here an apology. Frank, not Dad. He'd never once called me Dad, not in 9 years, and somehow that fact had never bothered me quite as much as it did standing in that living room. Ray glanced at me. I gave him the smallest nod, and the folder opened. Mr. Delaney asked me here, Ray said, in that same level, unhurried voice I'd known across a desk for 2 decades, because certain misunderstandings have developed regarding his estate and his future. Curtis laughed once. What estate? Ray didn't look up. Over the past month, we've completed a comprehensive plan. A revocable trust, 1 folder onto the coffee table. Updated medical directives, a 2nd. Revised powers of attorney, a 3rd. And an independent professional trustee. The temperature of the room changed the way a kitchen changes when you open the oven. Melissa blinked. You did all that, Dad? I did, I told her. I didn't know, she said. I know, I said, gently as I could manage. Curtis crossed his arms. I don't see why we need to be discussing any of this right now. Ray looked at him directly, for the first time. I think you do, he said, and for the first time all afternoon, Curtis stopped smiling. Some months back, Ray continued, my office received a call asking some fairly specific questions. Melissa frowned. What questions? Ray kept his eyes on Curtis. About guardianship. About how an aging homeowner might lose control of his own finances. About whether assisted living changes who holds title to a piece of property. Melissa's head turned toward her husband slowly. Like something mechanical. You called my father's lawyer. Those were hypothetical, Curtis said, too fast. I'm sure they were, Ray said pleasantly. I work in commercial real estate, Curtis said louder now. People ask about property law all the time. Plenty of people work in real estate, Ray agreed. They don't typically call their father-in-law's personal attorney to ask how an old man might lose his house. Nobody in that room breathed for a second. Curtis's mother stared at her hands. His brother studied the carpet, and Melissa looked at her husband like she'd never actually seen his face before. Why? She asked, barely above a whisper. You're all making this into something it isn't, Curtis said, throwing his hands up. I was planning ahead. For what? Melissa said, and her voice cracked straight down the middle. For our future, Curtis said. And my daughter took one physical step backward, away from him, and said the sentence I imagine I'll still be hearing in my head 20 years from now. My father's future was never yours to plan. The ceiling fan turned. Nobody moved. Curtis looked around the room for backup and found nothing but floorboards and folded hands. And then Walt cleared his throat from the corner where he'd been standing quietly the entire time. I saw the plate, he said, and every head in that room turned toward him. That wasn't an accident. That's ridiculous, Curtis snapped. Walt didn't raise his voice. Men like Walt rarely need to. I've been Frank's neighbor 22 years, he said, looking Curtis square in the eye. You looked at his food. Then you swung your arm on purpose. I watched you do it. And then, into the longest silence that room had probably ever held, Walt added the rest. And I heard you back in April. On the phone, parked outside his fence line. Curtis's face lost color by degrees, the way a screen dims. Something about a lake house, Walt said, and how the old man's knees wouldn't hold out forever. Melissa turned back to her husband one final time, and her voice came out barely above breath. You told me that joke about the lake house was a joke. Everybody's blowing this out of proportion, Curtis said. No, she said. It wasn't a joke at all. That's when I stood, not out of anger, but because I wanted the whole room to hear this at a normal, conversational volume. I didn't come here to embarrass anybody, I said. I came because I spent 31 years building a life with my wife, and I looked at my daughter. I wanted my retirement to be about fishing my koi pond, fixing small engines for the neighbors who still ask, and Saturday mornings with you and Theo. Instead, I found myself wondering whether I needed to protect my own front door. Nobody interrupted me. I never cared about the wrench, I told Curtis directly. I cared that you found humiliating me entertaining. And I cared even more, I said to the whole room, that somewhere along the way I started believing keeping the peace meant swallowing disrespect. I was wrong about that. The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was just honest, maybe the first fully honest silence that particular family had shared in a very long time. Ray quietly closed his folder. I believe our business here is finished, he said. Nobody stopped us at the door. Behind me, Melissa said one word, Dad. I turned, and my daughter stood there with 100 sentences stuck in her throat, none of them able to move, and then she simply started to cry. I gave her a small, sad kind of smile, and I walked out into the sunlight. In the driveway, Ray asked how I felt. I searched around for the right word a second. Lighter, I told him. He nodded like a man who'd seen exactly that 100 times before. That's what happens, he said, when people finally put down what was never theirs to carry in the first place. Life didn't turn to glass and sunshine after that. It never does. I still woke at 5:30 out of old habit. My knee still complained on the porch steps. Donna's chair still sat empty by the window. Some things don't change just because you finally told the truth out loud in front of everybody. 3 days later, Melissa called. I let it ring through, not out of punishment, just because I still didn't have the words, and went out to clean the koi pond filter instead. A week after that, she knocked on my door. She looked worn thin, dark circles, hair pulled back fast, no armor left on her at all. Can I come in? She asked. Of course, I told her, and made coffee. She sat down in Donna's chair without thinking about it, then froze. I'm sorry, she said. It's fine, I told her, and meant it. We didn't touch the coffee for a good 5 minutes. I didn't know, Dad, she finally said. I believe you, I told her, and I watched her decide to be braver than that sentence. But that's not the whole truth, she said, staring into her cup. I heard the little jokes over the years. I told myself they were small. They were, I said softly. One at a time, she said, looking up. But together they were a direction. Her eyes filled. I should have said something years ago. I put my hand over hers on the table and told her the truest thing I had left. You loved your husband, I said. I still do, she whispered. I know, I told her, and I love you. I know that too, she said, and cried the particular quiet kind of crying that comes from finally setting something heavy down. When she left that day, she hugged me harder than she had in years, and I let myself hope just a little that we'd turned some kind of corner. We hadn't, not yet. 2 weeks later she was back, angry this time, not at me exactly, more at the wreckage of everything. Curtis says the whole family ganged up on him, she said. I nodded. He says Walt exaggerated what he heard. I said nothing. And then the real question, the one she'd actually driven over to ask. Can't we all just move past this eventually? I looked at my daughter a long moment. Then I got up, walked to my desk, and pulled out an envelope with her name written on the front, a letter I'd written one night without quite planning to, about her mother, about how scared I'd been of losing her since the funeral, about why I'd swallowed every small cut for years because I believed standing up for myself risked losing her too. I held it out. She reached for it, and I gently pulled it back. Not yet, I told her. Her face fell. Dad, why? Because you're still trying to manage everybody's pain except your own, I said. You don't have to solve all of it today, I told her, and she hugged me at the door, and neither of us said his name out loud. Another month turned over. Summer leaned toward fall. The koi pond settled. Rose came back to the surface for pellets, same as before. I kept my Thursdays volunteering down at the community garden the county runs for veterans, breaking ground, fixing irrigation lines, coming home dirty, and going to bed lighter than I had in years. Then one cool afternoon in September, a third knock. Melissa stood on the porch alone, and something in her face had settled. Calmer, older somehow, cleaner. She sat down and said 2 words. I left. I didn't ask for details. She gave me the one that mattered anyway. I asked him one question, she said. I asked if he'd have treated you that way if Mom were still alive to see it. He couldn't answer me, Dad. Not one single word. I closed my eyes a moment, mostly for Donna. Then Melissa said the sentence that told me my daughter had finally come all the way back. I spent years calling it keeping the peace, she said, but really, I was just asking you to carry all of it by yourself. And then she stood, walked into my kitchen, and pulled a package wrapped in butcher paper out of a bag she'd left by the door. 2 pork shoulders, already trimmed. I stopped at Kowalski's on the way over, she said. Planning dinner? I asked. If you'll let me help, she said. For the first time since her mother passed, somebody stood next to me at that smoker, instead of just waiting at the table. The coals settled, the fat started talking the way it does, and my daughter reached for the old recipe card in Donna's handwriting, faded blue ink, squinting at it. The coffee goes in first, she said. That's right, I told her, and my voice didn't hold as steady as I wanted it to. She laughed through actual tears. I finally understand why these Saturdays mattered so much to you, she said. So do I told her. Now more than ever. When the food was ready, she carried my plate out herself, both hands, careful the whole way, set it down in front of me, looked me right in the eye, and said 6 words. Eat it while it's hot, Dad. I don't think she'll ever know the size of that sentence to me. Months earlier, somebody had knocked my dinner into the dirt to show a yard full of people exactly what he thought I was worth. Now my daughter stood guard over my plate like it mattered. No speech. No ceremony. Just respect, served warm. She and Curtis finalized their divorce the following spring, quietly. No courtroom theatrics. No celebration on my end. I'll tell you honestly, I felt more grief than victory watching that happen. No father wants his daughter's marriage to end, whatever the reasons behind it. But I'd learned something by then that I couldn't unlearn afterward. A family can't survive on respect that only ever flows in one direction. These days, Saturday mornings still happen at my place. The guest list is shorter than it used to be. Some weeks it's just Melissa and Theo and me. Some weeks Walt wanders over with his corgi, or a couple of the guys from the Veterans Garden stop by after church. The table's not as full as it once was, but nobody sitting at it is performing for anybody else anymore, and that's worth more to me than a full table ever was. Every so often I catch myself glancing at that koi pond, at the spot where a $200 wrench went down into the mud. The wrench is long gone, still down there probably, rusting away under the lily pads. What stayed with me wasn't the splash. It was everything I finally understood after it. I used to believe protecting my family meant absorbing whatever they decided to hand me. I don't believe that anymore. Getting older doesn't make a man worth less. It just means he's finally logged enough miles to tell the difference between love and obligation. And once you can tell those 2 things apart, friend, I promise you, the road gets a whole lot lighter under your feet. So here's the one thing I'd ask you to actually try this week, and it costs you nothing at all. Next time somebody's little joke lands on you, the same target every single time, say one calm sentence out loud. That one landed on me, not with me. Once. No anger behind it, just information. You'll learn everything you need to know from whatever happens right after. And here's the question I'd leave sitting on your table tonight, the one I sat with far too many years myself. How much of what you've been calling keeping the peace was really just keeping quiet? Tell me down in the comments if you think that wrench in the pond was exactly the right call, one clean answer to 9 years of noise. Tell me if you think I should have used my words that day instead of $200 of somebody else's tools, and that splash just handed him ammunition. Tell me if you think I waited far too long, and the real mistake was 9 years of swallowed comments, because some nights I'd vote that way myself. Let me know where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is where you are. It still gets me how far a backyard story like this one can travel. And if you've ever been the one at the table everybody's just kidding about, or the parent whose kids forgot to ask if you were okay, Tell me about it below. Somebody scrolling through tonight is rehearsing an apology for something that was never their fault to begin with, and they need to hear that they're allowed to put it down. Thanks for sitting with me tonight, truly. I'll see you next Saturday.